So what I would like to talk about right now is there are many things that we need to do, some of which is in our technology regime, some of which is in the decision making, the people who wants to implement the creation of startups, the investment, and some of it is in choices and choice architectures. Now, how do you decide? Because having said the problem is so difficult, so many choices are there, and there is limited capital, limited time. How do you deploy such a way that you get the best return for all your investment? So what I want to present today is a collection or an evolution of thought process that we have been having at the Energy Consortium and subsequent development of many activities, which has come together as what we call as the Climate Action Toolkit. Now everybody talks about a toolkit, so I also want to introduce a toolkit that we can use as an opportunity to understand this further. This is a problem. All right. So what is the target? So we have already set ourselves, like we need to, there is a net zero target for everyone. So the target that we have set for ourselves as a collective group, which consists of many of the agencies affiliated to IIT Madras that works on, is to get a 1 gigaton reduction in CO2 emissions through the projects that we work on, through the interventions we do, through the startups we build. And we already know that it is not a question of philanthropy, it is not a question of just a good to have, it is also a business opportunity. There is going to be a $4 trillion opportunity of transformation, building thousands of startups. At the Energy Consortium, what we provide is the technology base, the expertise, the infrastructure, and also the future skilled workforce and the leadership to support this transition. We've started our modest effort in creating these ventures as well, as I alluded in my inaugural talk, where we need to look at the market to lab to the market. The work that we do through Indus DC is one of the venture studios that we are trying to create, is to support that by building scalable ventures out of labs, identifying those technologies that have market relevance. If you even remove CO2 from the picture, CO2 is important, but even if CO2 is not involved, that is still viable, scalable, so that we can build successful models out of research intensive universities. But the one that is missing is, of course, all of you. So what we really need is a collective action that we are seeing from all the people out here, more builders, more hustlers, more investors coming together so that we can address and scale this problem. Now, how are we doing this? We have identified partnerships with universities. Energy Consortium is one, but I can already say that it is not just IIT Madras that has the IP. There are so much more work that's done across the world and across universities, where there is a lot of IP that is residing. There is a lot of laboratory that has the capability to do phenomenal work that is there, but it is not being tapped. I've heard from many people who say India is a graveyard of prototypes. Professor Ashok showed we can really translate many of them into actual products, provided we have a direction. Now we have a direction that we need to target 1 gigaton. And how do we take it from science to startups? And our effort to do at the Energy Consortium is to build that pipeline of innovators, labs, and the technologists that exist, and build a market that can support them. So how do we address this problem? So we can obviously go to the most attractive, the most funded, the most talked about elements like hydrogen, green hydrogen, which is of course necessary, but there is a hierarchy of work that we need to do. To tackle climate action, money needs to be deployed where you start getting the highest return on your investment to begin with. And my hierarchy of net zero is in this order, where we look at utilization of energy. One of the focus that we have is to say, use energy in the form it is needed, not overuse it. For example, not use it in such a way that it destroys its potential. A great example is using diesel for creating hot water for bathing, which used to be done in many hotels some time back, but many of them have now switched to heat pumps. So that is an example of better use of energy. Energy efficiency is going to play a huge role in doing this. Energy efficiency comes in multiple formats. We have seen the leap that has happened in LEDs. The next big sector that is ripe for disruption in energy efficiency is cooling, because cooling has been like this since Carrier developed this synthetic refrigerants, and it's been mainstay for the last 20 years. We only had incremental innovation, but that's going to be a disruptive requirement, because that is the one that's going to drive huge amount of capacity additions to the grid and also emissions from multiple use cases. RE integration along with these two plays a significant role, because RE integration also enables us to decarbonize a whole lot of sectors, starting with electrification of many sources. The megatrend that we are talking about is electrification of heating and cooling, heating primarily, and then RE plays a big role. We've already seen electrification of transportation. We will soon see everything to be on the grid. But to manage that, there are going to be a lot of requirements of technology, a lot of requirements of understanding and putting things together and optimizing them, and also looking at end use as a means. What I mean by that is, it is not only, we are not using electricity for the sake of electricity, but it is intended for a certain use, either it is pumping, cooling, heating, or so on. So looking at end use by way of appropriate integration is the last one, is the next one. The last aspect is, once you have done everything that is possible, you have to undo your karma, which is removing carbon. Alternative fuels, including hydrogen, comes into the category, but then many other solutions also fall under the same category. So to start with, energy efficiency is something that we have taken up on a big scale. We have 7 centers across the country. We are likely to add 3 more centers, because to start action, you need to be out in the field. I can't innovate sitting in the lab and deliver solutions to the market. I need to be in the market. The Kotak IITM Save Energy Mission is a CSR-supported initiative from Kotak, which allowed us to go out, talk to the MSMEs, talk to the end consumers, and really understand where do we decarbonize and how do we start. Many times it's surprising that a lot of these are low-hanging fruits, and MSMEs already contribute close to about 30% of our GDP. So that's an easy 30% to decarbonize, and that's where we start. And we're now adding 3 more centers to cover a bit of the white spaces that you see here. So this is our initiative to support the MSMEs, but also understand how do you reduce the carbon footprint, but also enable them to become more ESG compliant. The next thing that you do is, once you do energy efficiency, then we talk about what can I do with a lot of solutions that are required. This is where it becomes a bit tricky, because there is no single short answer, or there are no silver bullets. And this space is where a lot of technologies are competing, a lot of them are evolving. Some of them are matured, things that we talk about: electrification, energy efficiency, more and more of green hydrogen, EVs in the transportation space, and a lot of digitization and AI in the application-oriented space. But then once you dig deeper, I would like to draw parallel to the UPI example, where IIT Madras Research Park and IIT Madras played a big role there, where the online access to banking account, online transfer, all of them started evolving and emerging in the early 2000s. But it took almost probably about 10, 12, or 15 years for it to become mainstream and to become a seamless transaction that we do. And what was really required were at the interfaces and really looking at a full stack of what does it mean to completely do the transaction. And a similar thing is likely to happen in the energy space, where green hydrogen, for example, taking that is one thing that is available, but then there is an attendant requirement of storage, transportation, utilization, and figuring out what's the best way to do. And all of that are driven by industry. And if you take many other technologies, there are similar kind of requirements, and all of them have a role to play. Now, how do we choose, pick, decide, and accelerate some of this is a question that we want to ask, and that question can be answered by what we are trying to do as a development of a decarbonization modeling platform. So at IIT Madras itself, if you were to look back from what we had in the earlier slides and what are the focus areas that we have right now, there are quite a few areas that are at a low TRL. So this is a TRL transition that is required. Now, what do I pick, what do I scale, and how do I scale is something that we are focused on, and we are really looking to see how do we then pick the next winner. Some of the low-hanging fruits that we have already picked on is what I have listed here. These are coming from just one lab, which is my lab, but then through the consortium and through setting up the venture builder, what we are attempting to do is reach out to many such labs that have the opportunity and then scale the products and solutions. So taking the example of heat pumps or compressors and expanders, the other thing that also comes in focus with the availability of digital tools and with the availability of compute is across sector optimization, something that we are now trying to build digital models of what we are deploying so that we continue to monitor, continue to improve, and also get the feedback on what I call as making sure the gains stick. So on the compressors, I just want to move away from just talking to say what is the action that we are in. So this is the first net zero opportunity. We know that steam is an ubiquitous working fluid. It is used across industry. It is mostly confined to the boiler room. Nobody even thinks about it unless there is a problem in the boiler room, but that's a 20 gigawatt opportunity. This is just in India. It's not even across the world. It's just in India. And as India becomes more of a manufacturing powerhouse, that's 80 million ton of avoided CO2. It's just one utility that we are talking about, which is boilers. And the company that we are trying to build out of IIT Madras Research Park is an incubated company, is called Vankel, which came out of a lot of research and development. So that's one company that is trying to tap, but this is an opportunity that's sitting in front of your eyes that is not being recognized. The second net zero opportunity, again in the heating and cooling space, and why this is even more important, because you can already see it's a 200 million ton opportunity. It's almost 7-8% of India's CO2 emissions, and it's already an attractive opportunity. You don't even need to worry about CO2 emissions. It's already an attractive opportunity because it makes economic sense, and that's the number that you see here in terms of cost of heating and why it is important. And the same thing that goes with cost of cooling, the requirement of cooling, and you already see here India's peak demand for cooling is phenomenal. So it is an imperative. It is not even about a future choice. It is a current choice, and what we are trying to exploit it is through another IIT Madras. What happened? Why is it not? So another IIT Madras incubated company, where we are really trying to say these are the early things that we have picked up to start accelerating. But as we said, there are many more that are required to be built, and one of the ways in which we are trying to build the knowledge base essentially in the energy efficiency space, because all of these systems do not exist in isolation, they all work together. So one of the way that we are currently working on is building this energy efficiency operating system so that we stick and gather the low-hanging fruits, that are already available. So once you go beyond the low-hanging fruits, how do you then identify, scale up and commercialize technologies that are of interest to the larger, the bottom of the pyramid, or the bottom of my net zero pyramid, which are critical in hard to abate sectors, which are critical in many other regions. One way of what we are trying to do is to set up early stage discovery projects, as we call as the trend setup project. This is at the Energy Consortium, where we identify those elements that is required for decarbonization, but it is such a low TRL maturity level that we need a little bit of high risk development that is supported by early stage grant that we provide from the consortium. The second one is to set up demonstration or the capstone projects. So we also need, technology does not develop only in the lab, it needs to go beyond the lab, and there is a TRL 4 to 6 de-risking that is required, which is done through the mission mode projects. One example is sitting out here in the research park, which is a 1 megawatt hour battery pack, which has almost gone to a fairly high TRL. We've also done a few more such what I call as demonstrators in the main campus, particularly on technology which is not yet ready for the market, is a CO2 capstone, and microgrid looking at multiple utilization sources and utilization, which includes chilled water storage, battery storage, and so on. The last thing that we also pick up is, as there are so many choices to make, what kind of choice architecture do we follow, the industrial decarbonization modeling. Before I go there, some examples of what we have built in terms of CO2 capture. This is for the point capture, which allows us to capture the emission that is coming from an industry and figure out, is there a price that I can ascribe to this? How do I cost the CO2 that's coming out? And then the direct air capture, which is essentially taking it out of air and storing and sequestering it somehow. So these are technologies that are required. It needs to be developed at scale, which is being done, and then figuring out how do we scale it further. Now, moving on to the decarbonization modeling itself, as we have these discrete choices, how do we put it all together? There is a common minimum baseline that needs to come. One is data collection, that is through the audit platform that we have built and collecting data from the industry, but then also a choice architecture platform, say how do we decide what are the metrics by which you can do, and particularly when there are multiple sectors and multiple industries that need the same thing. Like if you say green hydrogen, where should it go? If you say CO2 capture, where should I deploy? If I say renewable energy, where should I use? So how do we decide? There has to be some way of understanding and developing that. So this is where we have developed the Climate Action Tool, which is currently being developed over a year of development so far. I would like to present some of the early results on it. But the framework in which we work is these 4 quadrants, right? On the right-hand side, we need to talk about adaptation, assuming it is going to happen, climate change impacts are real, and it is likely to be felt. So what do we do? How do we adapt? Adaptation is a tricky problem because there is no gains as such to be made. It is to prepare ourselves. Mitigation is what we have been really focusing on so far, trying to mitigate both short term, which is energy efficiency, alternative fuels and so on, and long term where you're trying to reimagine industries like Professor Ashok this morning, reimagining transportation. Similarly, how do we reimagine each and every industry is what we are trying to do long term. So the approach is integrated modeling. What we have been trying to look at is semi-empirical, evidence-based modeling, completely parameterized so that you can model it at multiple scales and then optimize. So in a way, if you can imagine how we are structured, a component and a collection of component is a factory, a collection of factory is an industry, and a collection of industries is a cross sector, and you can go on and so forth. A collection of cross sectors is a country, and a collection of countries is your globe. So it's a bottom-up approach to modeling to make sure that you can not just project but also act. So that's the reason why the tool is also called Climate Action Tool. So one of the examples that we have done right now is to take 3 sectors, which is cement, steel and power, and if we were to, these are the fuel mix that is currently available to me: coal, natural gas, renewable electricity and hydrogen. And if I were to use this, how do I do? This is an example of some of the early results that has come out of my tool, where it says that if I need to go towards a certain specific output, which is maximizing my return on investment for CO2, what do I get? And I'll just present the results. I know I'm running out of time. But in this case, it says that if I were to use before optimization, after optimization, before I do anything about CO2 in the cement and after I do, the price increase in cement is almost 116%, which means the cost of cement more than doubles. The question that you want to ask, and the cost of steel similarly increases more than 55%. The question that you want to ask is, where do we consume cement and steel? It's going to be our infrastructure. Now, how do you price your infrastructure? How do you essentially understand what should be my green credits for building with these kind of materials? So this now gives you a targeted focus, saying that if you're going to use green cement, here is going to be incentive, and then look forward, how do I reduce the incentive going forward? And power, you already know it's sensible because renewable energy is already on par with the coal-based power, so the modest increase, it's not such a large increase that you see here. But the impact that you see here is phenomenal in terms of the reduction in CO2 emission. So that's kind of what we have, and then of course you can look at multiple such sectors and decide on where do you invest money. One other example after which I will stop is also to look at, are your policy actions appropriate and sufficient? I take the example of PAT, which was a scheme that was introduced by Bureau of Energy Efficiency in the early 2000s after the Energy Conservation Act, to show how do you incentivize industries to reduce their energy consumption. There was an arbitrary set target. The question that we wanted to ask is the target sufficient and appropriate? And what we found is the industries could have done much more without really battling an eyelid. So the targets were quite weak, which means as a policy tool is also something that we want to leverage data and modeling to understand how do we incentivize. And this goes back to the incentives that we're talking about for the cement and steel sector. So that's what I wanted to see. There is a climate risk, there is a climate action that is required, and there is also a focused approach. What we would like to look at and work with all of you is to create a toolkit. A toolkit is very specific for the region, but it can also be general. So I would thank you all for your time and attention. I know we probably are running a little bit behind time, but looking forward to interacting with you at the various sessions. Thank you very much.